The Notorious Sorcerer is available in bookstores with the link you can find below. So, the first hard-hitting question I've got for you. As a fantasy writer, we're all into really weird shit, like we all are. Do you have any other nerdy pastimes or interests? I know political strategy popped up in your bio, but tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I did. I did my honors in political strategy way back in the dim depths of my youth. I was very into Machiavelli and that sort of thing at that stage, and that has remained something that I'm very interested in, though not something I pursued academically. But yeah, I love political fantasy and I love machinations still, which is possibly why my preferred sort of genre of computer games is more the strategy and often like trading games,
like
and things like that.
Like Civilization and Risk, or
I've been playing a lot of Civ 6 recently, yeah. But also there's this really old game where I think it's called Merchant Prince, where you're like a Venetian merchant and you do the trading, but you also do the scheming and the politics back in Venice.
Nice.
Yeah, love a bit of that sort of thing.
One of the interesting things about your book is that you have idealists. Like right now, we're so inundated with grimdark, and I love grimdark. It's wonderful, but your novel was refreshingly like you had people who were doing things because no selfish motivation whatsoever, just because they cared, which you don't see as often nowadays. How does that mesh with your Machiavellian roots?
Like Machiavelli gets a bit of a bad rap. Like what he wanted was a strong prince to get a bit of stability and get a bit of strength. And he was a Republican. He wanted the prince to then hand over rule to the people once there was stability, and that could happen in a sustainable way. Which is not at all what people mean when they say Machiavellian, and I accept that. But that sort of idea of let's try and do something better, let's try and build something, I do find, especially in our current catastrophe, it's something that I think we need a little more of. And I have also enjoyed a whole lot of grimdark in the past, but increasingly I'm finding that I want to read things that are a little bit fun, a little bit kind, not necessarily nice, but kind.
Yeah, that was the energy I really enjoyed while I was reading too. Like it's
excellent.
It's so nice to get a little bit of that, because I mean, you need it in life, and I don't know, you need it in your fantasy too sometimes too, I think.
Yeah. And there's a whole lot of, I don't know, there is a whole lot of kindness happening now, and it shines the brighter because the whole lot of the backdrop is so dark. But yeah, that's something that I'm more actively seeking out and trying to put out into the world these days.
Nice. We got Linko in the chat. Hey, Linko, how's it going? He's putting in the shake weight. Is that like a... Yeah, no, that's an actual shake weight emoji. He's putting the shake weight into the world right now. And Suzanne as well. Oh, hi, Suzanne. I didn't figure out the captions yet, but maybe next time for sure I'll make a note of that. So tell me, what got you into writing? When did you start?
I have always written, pretty much. When I was a very small child, I had the realization that the books in the library didn't just magically appear there. People wrote them, and that's how they came to be. And yeah, I went, oh, well then I could do that. Which I think every kid does. Every kid writes stories and they tell stories. And I just never got out of the habit. Like seriously being a writer, like I don't know, you have that childhood thing where it's like, yes, I can do this. And then you go through your teens and your early 20s and you're like, oh, that's really hard, actually. And that's a very small chance of anything happening. But somewhere in my mid-20s I went, but I still want to try and do it. And I sat down and started working at it a bit more seriously. And like 15 years later, here I
Just
am.
15 years, that's all it took. Yeah.
It's not been a short road, but it's been fun the whole way. Like writing itself has been fun. Which, I don't think I would have made it for 15 years if it hadn't been fun.
Yeah, and that is pretty typical. That's just how long it takes between just sort of like perfecting the craft to all of the ins and outs of finding an agent and getting published. It's amazing that you went from this vision in your 20s to what you've got right now. Like for the book that you just published, The Notorious Sorcerer, how long did that take from start to publication? How many years has that been in the works?
It's had a long and wobbly path. It was originally a piece of fan fiction. I took a couple of characters that I was really fond of from something else, and I just made up this world to put them in.
So is this like a 50 Shades of Grey story? Was it Twilight? You can tell me.
Yeah, it was not quite that saucy. But I was just I had a fandom friend, and we liked a whole lot of the same things in fantasy. So I was like, I'm just going to shove everything that we love into this world and have our favorite characters running around in it, and that was great fun. And then it just sort of sat there for a few years, and then I struck out with the thing that the serious business thing that I'd been trying to pitch. And I thought, okay, well, it was a very mannered political sort of fantasy. And I thought, I just want something fun to play with for my next project. And I thought, hey, I could just take that. Because like it was 95% my own stuff anyway. And I was like, okay, I want to just take that and build it out a bit more. And as always happens when you say, oh, I could just, it wasn't that easy and it wasn't that quick. So I worked on that for a few years. I think it was like maybe 2.5 years at that point. And I got an agent with that book. That was very exciting. And then that version of the story struck out on subs with editors. At that point, I had these sort of 3 big stories. My main characters all had their own things that were going on. And the feedback was like, there's just too much stuff, which in hindsight was completely correct. So I kind of put that aside and I worked on something else for a few years. And then that one was also going nowhere. I'd gone through 3 drafts of it. I couldn't seem to make it just come together the way I wanted. And I went, you know what, I'm going to go back to Notorious Sorcerer and I'm going to fix it. So yeah, that took another 2 years of work. So I think it was like 8 years from the first thing. I actually know, what does my dedication say? Because it's dedicated to the same friend that I dedicated the fanfic to. So yeah, that it's for Edgeard, again, 13 years later. It was probably only 8 years working on it as a book.
I'm so glad you stuck with it because it came out amazing. I could not put it down. It was so good and so much fun to read. Everything from the characters to the world building was all fantastic. So some of these characters had other lives in similar stories before they arrived in the book that you have today. Now I'm really like which characters were in your original fanfic?
So it's Sion and Ismelian, the ones that were derived from the fanfic characters. But they've changed a bit. Like I think there's still that core bit that like it was inspired by the original characters, but there's an awful lot of an awful lot of change has happened.
So, the Notorious Sorcerer is, and I quote, a dazzling fantasy bursting with wild magic, Caddick sword fighting street gangs, brazen flirting. Some pretty good flirting there. Malevolent harpies, excuse me, and when defiant alchemists. I absolutely loved it. I loved it so much that I read it up until the epilogue, and then I refused to finish the epilogue because I didn't want it to be over. Like, that's how much I liked it. I didn't really want to lose more time with your characters. So again, I'm going to throw that link in. There we go. So for people who haven't read the book, what kind of adventure are you going to take your readers on? How are they going to feel? What kind of roller coaster are they about to get on when they pick up this book?
Well, from the early reviews that I'm getting, it's a very fast roller coaster, which was funny to me because it wasn't really how I thought about it. But
because you were taking things out, you're like, I've slowed this down so much. I
love reading the sort of books where it's just you get thrown in the middle of an amazing world with characters who are just living their lives, and so this is all normal for them, and you sort of pick up things as you go. So that's very much the sort of book that I wrote, which can be a bit full on. It's not for everyone, which is fine. There's so many great books out there right now. It's just amazing. We're all spoiled for choice. But yeah, I wanted one where there wasn't a lot of exploration of the world. It's like, we're here and off we go. Just follow me for now. It'll all make sense later. And so yeah, it's a bit chaotic. It's a bit fun. The main character, Sion, is an absolute disaster.
He's a wonderful disaster to follow.
Yeah, if you're into a guy who makes consistently bad choices, but like with a good heart. Super relatable
as someone who regularly makes terrible choices.
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah, I drew extensively on my own history of making poor decisions, especially when hungover or slightly inebriated. And just off you go.
Yeah, fortunately, he starts off with a hangover, doesn't he?
He does. They say this is a piece of writing advice that is like, start with your character doing something that they're really good at. So I did.
Getting drunk and suffering the next day.
Yeah. The next day when you have to work and you have to have your shit together. Yeah.
Yeah, and he did. Like, you've got this cool extra planar element. So, like, maybe we could talk a little bit about the magic in it. Like, you rush right into it, which is amazing. You get to see some of the fantasy, like, right off the bat. Could you talk a little bit about how magic and alchemy works in the Notorious Sorcerer?
In the city that I've created, it exists at the point where the 4 planes of reality come together. So it is the only place in the mundane world where you can cross the boundaries to the other planes and bring stuff back. The stuff that is brought back from the other planes can be used in alchemy to make magic. The alchemists would not like. They don't like using the magic word. It's very serious business. It's very scientific. They're very precise. They're very measured. But
and I loved how you handled like scientific hubris. Like, that was another really relatable thing. Like, the people on the outside of it and then the people on the inside of it, and that sort of arrogant clash between the scientific and the non-scientific. You really nailed that. Yeah.
And that's something I really wanted, is the people on the inside going, but this is the way it is done. And yeah, I wanted to have the people knocking on the door going, okay, but maybe it isn't necessarily the way it's done. So Sion comes into this very, very structured and rigid world and starts knocking shit over, basically, um,
Which he
and bringing
does
some
excellently.
change.
So, one thing I really liked about the planes was how the four planes are both elemental, but there's also like this moral element, and like it's not just earth, water, fire. It's like you've got this whole nuanced set of personalities, set of social dynamics, set of energies that can't just be nailed down into this discrete box of a thing or an element. Like, I don't know, that it's more of a comment than a question, but one thing I especially loved about the way you put the planes together, and how they were these quadrants of like things that are more than just physicalities, but also quadrants of like ideas and feelings and social structures and interactions and stuff. I thought it was extra brilliant. Did you have any kind of inspiration for that, or?
I sort of started. I sort of started from alchemy, but I play very fast and loose with the idea of alchemy, especially sort of the Western European
So
idea of
is
alchemy.
your browser history full of like alchemical research?
It is. It really is. Like there's um, a lot of that sort of stuff in there. But in alchemy, there's this idea of getting to the essence of something and this correlation between a physical thing and a spiritual thing. Um, so that whole chestnut about turning lead into gold is about um, the idea being that gold is a higher spiritual thing than lead. So it's all about the transmutation of not so good stuff into excellent stuff. So this idea of a correlation between the physical and a spiritual or a philosophical sort of thing. Really, when I started writing, I was like, okay, so it can't just be fire. It has to be fiery things as well. Um, and I went through a lot of cycling around, figuring out what the planes were going to be, how things were going to work. Um, yeah, sort of the idea that so the word that I use for the fiery plane is empyreal, which is an old word for heaven because it was considered, this righteous flame and all that sort of thing. But then you've got, your ideas of hell, which is also traditionally sort of fiery. But as someone who grew up in a very tropical place, I had absolutely no trouble thinking of hell as like really humid and sweaty and just gross. Um, but yeah, so there was a lot of stuff that started coming together as I was thinking about things and sort of reading through a lot of different traditions and what things are associated with what elements in various different systems of all that sort of thing. Um, yeah, and sort of bringing things together, a bit of a synthesis, a bit of cherry picking, I've got to admit, because it's my world and I get to decide how it works. Um, yeah, to bring about a balance. I didn't want it to be this one good, that one bad. It's like everything is complex. Everything has facets. Yeah.
Awesome. And I apologize if there's a bit of background water going on. One of the joys of traveling and doing this is that randomly I have neighbors that are suddenly making a lot of noise. So, circling back to your inspiration for things, tell me a little bit more about your favorite characters in the book and how'd you come up with them? Are there any real life experiences that you wanted to put into those characters?
My favorites are always the ones who behave badly. There's a bit of living vicariously there. I am not badly behaved, honestly. I am, as an Australian, a bit cheeky and a bit I've got a certain degree of doubt about authority figures, but my favourites in the book are Sion, Lakshmi, the demoness, the harpy. She's a big favourite of mine. And there's always in everything I've ever written, there's been an older lady who smokes a pipe and basically gives zero fucks about anything. She's actually like a version of that character has shown up everywhere. So Auntie Garis is also one of my favorites. I don't know why this has always been there. Like now I look at it and I go, well, that's just hashtag goals. For me, that's what I'd like to be when I grow. I'm not sure about the pipe. I don't know about that, but like that's the sort of old lady I'd like to grow into. Yeah. And also Anahid is...
Anahid was actually my favorite, I think, yeah.
She's another sort of character that I like a lot, which is the very well-bred woman, very well-educated woman who gets to the end of her tether and is like, you know what, actually, I'm going to do something else. And I'm very, very looking forward to where her story goes in books 2 and 3 because she's got some fun things in store.
Nice. So to take kind of a big picture look at things, what is it that made you want to write The Notorious Sorcerer in the first place? What did you really want to say?
Look, figuring that out is part of why it took so long, I think. Because it did just start out as something fun. But in the course of it, a whole lot of questions about that balance between being yourself and being a part of society. So it's like, yes, be true to yourself, but don't be an asshole about it, sort of came up. And there are many sort of ways in which that manifests in every character's storyline. And sort of a questioning of assumptions, of rules, of traditions, of anyone who says this is the way it is. It's like there's room for doubt in there, or there should be room for questioning. And sometimes when you question, you come back to, okay, this way is better than the other options, but I think there should always be room for asking the question in the first place.
Nice. So the next thing I really wanted to ask, if this isn't too much of a spoiler, do you want to talk about representation in your book, gender roles, wherever you want to go with it?
Yes. So really the starting point of thinking about how I was going to tackle gender and sexuality representation in the book came from the original fanfic, because it was slash, it was a male pairing. When I came to turning it into a book, I was like, okay, but I want to have some female characters. I want to be writing about some women as well. And sort of the first and obvious answer there was, well, I could gender flip one of that initial pairing. But as soon as I did that, the dynamic changed, or the perception of the dynamic changed. Because if you have a male character and a female character having an intense and complicated interaction, it's like, well, obviously this is going to be romantic. And I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite so obvious.
Yeah, and you had romance, but you didn't have any of the tropes. I mean, you can dig and find some tropes if you're really looking, but it wasn't like, bam, this is a romance and this is going to happen, this is going to happen. It was like, I have no idea where this is going. Like it was refreshingly unpredictable.
But I mean, it's like that's what a dynamic should be. It should be these two characters coming together in a way that is uniquely them, in whatever way that's going to be. And I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I didn't want it to be quite that romantic, even though it is. It's like I did So sort of as soon as I was thinking that, it's like, okay, so I'm going to have other female characters. And then I was thinking about how many other female characters I could have in supporting roles and in big things. So sort of a question that I was asking as I went through was, okay, so I've got this new character. Is there a reason they can't be a woman? And so I ended up with an interesting sort of mix. And I'm like, okay, well, if I've got a female prefect in charge of everything, and if I've got these characters as female, then that means I've got a society that, you know, like, how's that going to fit with my society? And I'm not going to say that misogyny isn't a thing in my city, because, like, there's a whole lot of internalized stuff that I probably still got in there. But it's a lot closer to gender equality. It's also effectively a queer norm world. Same-sex pairings don't really attach. They don't have any stigma attached.
And that was
which doesn't necessarily
one of the interesting things. That was also one of the interesting things, because you had you don't really know how people are identifying. It could be fluid, it could be demisexual, it could be no identification whatsoever, and not having that like strict categorization was kind of interesting as well. I thought it was probably in some ways more true to life.
So I hope, I wanted to reflect a little more sort of the society that I see around myself. Yeah. And there's a lot of, like, the problem with the queer norm world is there are elements of it that obviously don't feel realistic. But if I was all about realism, I wouldn't be writing fantasy. There's like, why shouldn't there be wish fulfillment for queer people as well? Why shouldn't they get to see themselves having adventures and just being unquestionably normal? So that was a thing that I wanted to have in there. Also, for various spoilery reasons, I wanted to be representing many queer people and queer couples, rather than sort of just having my one central one and everyone else is just mysteriously heterosexual.
So also another kind of interesting thing was, like you said, you had women in positions of power, but you also did include a lot of the trappings of, the equivalent of having to be available for marriage and the importance of marriage as having a value for women. Do you want to talk a little bit about like the politics of that, or?
So that's it's particularly a thing among the elite, among the Azatani class in the city, and that has a lot to do with the whole notion of continuing the line, like continuing the family line and the family tradition, and natural born children being the way to do that. There is a bit more of a culture of adoption, and that can be possible. I didn't really get a chance to explore that in this book. It might come out in one of the later books, but yeah, certainly children born of your line is viewed as the best way to continue things. So there is not so much a push towards heterosexuality, but like that's the problem. You can find many sorts of solutions to it. But also marriages as alliances between families, and the bringing together of resources and political power and that sort of thing. So yes, marriage still serves a purpose. Sounds like a very mercenary way of looking at it, but they are a very mercenary sort of people. But they don't all have to be heterosexual marriages. I had a couple of same-sex marriages among the Azatani in there, but they were all very background. But yeah, there are considerations in there, and that is more of a thing for the Azatani class with their trappings of wealth and privilege that they want to hang on to.
So a couple of comments from the chat. Shale says, look at the confusion caused by Harry Potter when everyone for the first 2 or 3 movies, most people thought Hermione and Harry were going to get together, but you only find out later she was into Ronald instead. And Lanko adds that how Game of Thrones set Sansa with Joffrey in the beginning as well. And you get these like romantic tropes kind of spun in really crazy directions.
Yeah, there's I wrote a blog about this sort of concept, and I quoted Avril Lavigne with "He was a boy, she was a girl. Can I make it any more obvious?" And it's like that thing. It's like we're so used to in a piece of media. It's like, oh, here's an attractive woman and here's an attractive man. Well, obviously that's gonna happen. Okay, off we go. Yeah.
So let's get a little bit behind the scenes. What is your approach to writing? Like, what's your artistic process? Does it involve insane amounts of coffee and sugar?
Oh, that's just life involves insane amounts of coffee and sugar. That's the starting point. I was laughing at the term artistic process because I feel like I actually come at it more like business than art these days.
So you are a planner and not a gardener. I
am a very big planner, yes.
Do you make these enormous outlines and spreadsheets? Is that?
Oh, yeah. I have a great big pin board and I pin everything up. I do myself a scene-by-scene outline before I start writing. And then, well, the bonus of this is that when I sit down to write for a session, I have the little note that says, this is what you're writing today. You're writing this scene. I'm like, okay, I'm writing that scene. And I write that scene and that's that. I was always a planner. But when I had my kid.
Are you like a planner in life?
All of a sudden, it's amazing. Like, I used to be able to hold so much stuff in my head and I could just hold the story in my head and it would always be turning over. And then along comes the kid and just shoves everything else out of my head. It was literally impossible to hold a chain of thought over like a 24-hour period. So then my planning became absolutely essential because otherwise I would sit down at the session and be like, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing today. It's like, and I could take what I thought was happening and then I just write for like 10,000 words in the wrong direction and come to a point where I was like, oh, they were supposed to be over here. Okay, I'm going to have to go back and make that work. Just so frustrating. But yeah, the planning works very well for me. And I sit down for a session, I write a scene and I'm done and I put that away and that's the end of the session. Which seems to be antithetical to a whole lot of writers. Like there's writing advice about, always end your session in the middle of something so that when you come back, you can jump right in. And I'm like, no, I couldn't do. I come back in the middle of something. I'm like, what the fuck was I going to say next? I don't remember. I'm sure it was really good. Damn. And then I spent like 15 minutes berating myself for not forgetting what I was going to do. And it just doesn't work.
Yeah, the psychic dissonance there is crazy. Lenko says, everyone says they are gardeners inspired by the muse. So yeah, the planning thing is a minority. The creative outline.
Yeah, no, I'm a big planner.
Another nice thing about outlines is that when you need to do a structural edit, the whole outline's right there. So like structurally what's going on. You know how you can move things around without the whole pile of cards falling down or house of cards.
I very much revise on an outline level first, and that's where like I have my big pin board really comes in handy because you pin out here's the old structure and here's the new structure, and then you can you link up all your stuff, and it looks like one of those crazy conspiracy boards, but it gets the job done. It helps me get my head around what it's going to look like. And that's a very exciting moment.
I've always wanted to make one of those, but every time I've tried, I've just realized that it makes me more confused than I was at the beginning.
Yep. Not every tool is for every writer.
Lenko asks, "Is Dee reading the chat?" And I don't think she is, but I can read it to her.
Not in the chat, no.
But just throw it at me, and I will repeat it all. It is entirely the streamer's fault. Thank you, Shale. That always makes me feel so much better. But yeah, now that we're near the end, suddenly it's silent again. They're just like bath time was randomly at the exact same time as the interview. So I wanted to also ask, writing takes a lot of investment, a huge amount. Like you said, years and years and years. I know my book I've been editing for like 12. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to count because then I'll get embarrassed and depressed. But it takes a huge amount of investment. What was it that kept you going with this particular process, with this particular book?
With this book, with Notorious Sorcerer, it was the feeling that this was something, and I could get somewhere with this one. Which I'm very happy that turned out to be the case. In general, it was just that I would rather be writing than not writing. It is a fun hobby. It is a thing that I like to do. So my feeling was always that even if the stories went nowhere, then I was still having fun and I was getting satisfaction out of the process. There's a lot of things that I like that come together in writing. So I like problem solving. I get a real buzz out of like, here was the problem and now I fixed it. It is better. And I like words. I'm quite a word nerd. And I like putting together something that's like elegant and intricate. So like jigsaw puzzles and things like that. Those are fun too. But all of these things come together in writing, and it's the one hobby that covers all of those bases. Obviously, if like my own validation was the only thing I cared about, I'd have stuck with fanfic because like that's a much easier way of indulging the hobby. But yeah, I like writing the big novel.
Though I don't know, some of those fanfic communities can be pretty vicious.
Yeah. They can. That's true. And there's a lot of, like the social politics can get crazy. More so now than like when I was involved, like 15 or whatever years ago. I don't know. The rise of Twitter has not necessarily helped any social politics, even fandom.
So I got a question from Shale in the chat. He asks, where can we get autographed copies if you want to buy one that was autographed? Get that hand
unfortunately, unfortunately, the answer to that is, well, if you're in Melbourne, Australia, then you're in luck. You can get autographed copies, but if you're not in Australia, then not yet. I'm trying to figure out a way to make this happen, like maybe signed book plates or something like that. At the moment, like international postage is kind of expensive. So I'm trying to figure out a way that's going to work out best for everyone, but I haven't quite nailed it yet.
Totally unrelated.
Keep an eye out.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Keep an eye out on your website.
Yeah. On my website, I have a newsletter. If you don't like Twitter, but yeah, I will. If I crack that one and have an option, I will post up something about it.
And totally unrelated to anything, I was just in Ecuador and randomly I discovered that during some privatization, one of their privatization rounds, they decided to privatize the entire post office. So there's no post office anymore. So your only option is like spending $9 million on DHL to send stuff. It's crazy.
Oh, God. Oh God.
Well, so going back to the previous question about what you really enjoyed writing about, what got you through this long investment, um, I find writing really cathartic personally, and it's a great chance for me to explore ideas about the world, think about things in a new, unique way that I wouldn't be really capable of doing inside the boxes that I'm living in. Um, what does writing do for you as a person? Like what, like mentally, mental stimulation, psychologically, that kind of thing.
Um, I'm gonna sound a bit of a psychopath saying this, but it's an acceptable way to emotionally manipulate people. Uh, like
You would make a great dungeon master. You should jump in on our Dungeons and Dragons stream.
but yeah, it's like you. The point of a piece of writing is always to make someone feel something, and so it's acceptable when you're a writer to sit down and go, "I'm going to make you cry," and off you go, and then you achieve that, and people congratulate you for it, and it's very nice, and no one actually gets hurt, and that works out well for me. Um, so yeah, there's a strong element of wanting to evoke an emotional response, and it's not always making people cry. Sometimes it's making people happy, or yeah, giving the payoff for the tension that you've raised, and all that sort of thing. So that's something that I really enjoy. Um, that's a way in which fanfic is fantastic, because you post the thing and immediately like 6 people are like,
Are already crying.
"Here's my emotional outpouring."
Yeah. It is
It's
super
very very
satisfying.
valid.
But also,
Yeah.
is there like something connected to that? Are you trying to shepherd the reader among certain realizations? Like, are you trying to give them an experience that'll help open their eyes to certain things with your emotional manipulation?
Um, well, that's a bonus. That's nice. It's um, there's a thing. I think being Australian here gives me a slightly different view on this. Australian media is often very amorphous in its messaging, or its things. There's often a lot of stuff in Australian film and television and books that is like it's there for you to pick up, but it's not necessarily the point. Um, and so there's a lot of times when I'm writing and it's like here's a thematic resonance, here's an interesting little conundrum, here's an extra point that is there, and it comes up as I'm writing, and I'm like, that's nice, I like that. Let's leave that there. But it's not so much I hope the reader gets this. It's here's a thing if the reader is interested. And the main through line really is just having fun and having an adventure. But
Nice.
there's bonuses on the way.
So speaking of fun, we have some questions from the chat. Going back to Dungeons and Dragons first, Lenko asks, "What class and race would you choose?" Monka, is that an emoji? It's probably an emoji showing up in. Yep, that's how it shows up in my stream. But yeah, what class and race would you choose if you were playing Dungeons and Dragons? Do you know enough about Dungeons and Dragons to know what?
Yeah, I've played Dungeons and Dragons a few times. I almost always choose just like a warrior, a fighter type class. I'm a simple girl who just likes to hit things with something large and heavy. So that's I almost always go with a whacking sort of character.
Yeah, for someone who writes about sorcerers, that's an interesting choice.
Well, I was going to say, although really, like, I'm probably more suited to rogue type characters, which it's like, is Sion a sorcerer, or is he a rogue, or is he multiclassing? It's yeah.
He's definitely got the rogue personality in a sorcerer, which is really fun to see.
Yeah.
So human or not?
probably human. It's
Human
because
fighter.
I've
You're so
only.
basic. I love it. It's awesome. You're so
I am.
basic
Well,
that
this
it's
is,
like now super like counterculture and edgy to be the human fighter. I feel like
well, because I've only played a few times, it's like I don't really understand how the system works. And if you start getting into more complicated things, it's like you have to understand how to game your stats and like make a character build that really maximizes potential. And it's like I don't understand enough to do that. How about I just whack things with a big chunk of metal? Yes. Um, so yeah. And I tend to default to this in every system. Like I've played a little bit of werewolf, and I was the warrior class, and I hit things. And I've played a little bit of vampire, the masquerade, and similarly, I default to just whacking things. I'm a very simple girl.
I mean, at the end of the day, a vampire's got to get staked, right? Whacking's where it's at.
Yep.
All right. So next question. We don't talk about whacking. It brings back bad memories of werewolves for me, says Shale. Lanko is not feeling a human fighter.
Oh.
I'm reading between the lines. I could be misinterpreting his emojis. Next question. What do you think helped you the most as you were honing your skill at writing? What do you think really helped you start to blossom and kick off that learning curve?
Not to keep coming back to this, but fan fiction was a big thing. Just because the amount of writing and the amount of reading and the amount of thinking about writing that I was doing in my big fanfic phase, I improved so much. And it was that very short cycle of validation, because it's like I wrote a thing, it's like, here's what I want to achieve, and I put it up and I get immediate feedback. And that feedback helps me go, oh, okay, so this worked or that didn't work. And I can go straight back into writing something else and trying a different way or trying something different. I did a lot of trying to consciously mimic other authors' style when writing fanfic, which taught me a lot about, how those styles work and what they're effective for. And a lot of the technical underpinning of writing I got to play with very consciously when I was writing fanfic, in a way that you certainly can when you're writing original stuff, but getting that quick round of feedback from more than just like a small writers group, it takes a lot longer, and it's not necessarily as useful. So I'd been writing quite a lot before I discovered fanfic, but the increase in my skills in that period when I was writing fanfic, it was sort of 5 years when I was at university, where it's like if I wasn't studying, I was doing fanfic stuff. At the end of university, it's like I'm a much better writer than I was before.
Yeah, for me, writing was my procrastination catharsis. And I was also on, I don't know if it's a fanfic site. It was Writers Cafe. And I wasn't fanficking other people's characters, but I was using like another world because I was too lazy to do my own world building. And it was really, really nice. Like I never would have written like multiple chapters if there weren't like 30 people going, oh my God, this is amazing. That encouragement is like just, it means the world. I can't it's like, I can imagine being able to complete anything without it, you know?
Yeah. Because writing is very solitary, except when you've got community, and that helps so much.
And even just an audience of 1 or 2 or 3, and knowing that you got an emotional response that you were going for or didn't, you know, that's just what it's for, right?
Absolutely.
So you said you like to explore other writing styles. Were there any major influences, any favorite writers that really, really affected your approach to writing that you love? I noticed you got some really good Really good endorsements there. I was looking at your endorsements. I was like, what? Chakraborty?
I was so pleased with the blurbs I got from other writers. That was very, very exciting. In terms of influences on me, I wanted to write like Guy Gavriel Kay. I'm not saying his name right. It's probably Guy, or something else. But anyway, Guy Gavriel Kay. I wanted to write like him for like years and years and years and years and years. And his was one of the styles that I would mimic very consciously and try and figure out how it's so effective. But eventually I had to admit that was not the sort of writing that I was really most excited about.
He's very verbose.
He is. He's very stately. He's very poetic. And I still love reading his work, but it's not my natural voice. So in terms of giving myself permission to be a bit less stately and a bit more cheeky, Scott Lynch and The Lies of Locke Lamora.
It's just like a good one.
It's a game changer. It was like, oh, hang on. It's allowed to be fun and have a lot of swearing, and it's like, yeah, it gave me the freedom to explore a more natural voice for me. Yeah.
So Shale says, writing, DMing, storytelling is never failure as long as you manage to reach one person and fill them with hope, passion, and love.
That is a good philosophy.
So, in schools, which I've been in and out of, both in the teaching role and not, we're taught, or we teach, to look for deeper meaning in everything we read. Are there any secret hidden metaphors in your works that you hope people pick up on, or that you just kind of nestled in there, like as maybe a secret Easter egg? And related
part
to
of
that,
the fun.
Okay, I'll go for it.
Part of the fun of fantasy is like you can make the metaphor real, and also the real can be a metaphor. So we were talking earlier about, I've got my 4 planes of existence, and they've got their physical components, but they've also got, so yeah, the heaven plane is fiery and desert, but it's also it's very much evocative of duty and righteousness and justice and unflinching emotions like that. So the metaphor is made explicit, but on the other hand, that helps other things that are associated with that sort of slide into the background. So characters who are associated with that plane, that can be an exploration of the things that are good and bad about righteousness and justice and all of those sorts of things. In the end, like I feel like I'm throwing a whole lot of spaghetti into it, and it's very much up to the reader what shines through for them and what comes through and what resonates, because we've all got different experiences of life, and we're all going to find different things that go together, that click for us. And especially, like, I've read books 10 years apart, and it's like I got one thing out of it the first time, and the next time I read it, it's like, actually, there's this whole other thing that I just completely missed. So yeah, I hope there is enough in my book to, well, reward rereading, but also to provide something interesting for any reader.
And that can happen with stuff that you've written yourself that you read, where you're like, oh, I said that? Huh. So I wanted to also ask, so a bit of trivia here. In an earlier version of your cover, the logo for, what was it? Was it Istanbul? Was on that?
The City Council of Istanbul logo ended up on there.
What were some of the real world inspirations for your setting that you drew from? Were there real places that you were drawing on, or is it just totally from scratch?
It was a mash of many inspirations, some of them real and some of them imaginary. So a big inspiration was there's an author, M. John Harrison, who wrote a collection of short works set in a city called Viraconium, which is a secondary world. In some of the short works, it's a portal fantasy. It's a thing you can reach from the real world. In some of them, it's just the magic setting. And Viraconium was a really interesting mashup of elements, but it was also a sort of, at the time when I read it, Viraconium was a more modern city than I was used to seeing in fantasy. I was probably reading this like 20 years ago, and fantasy seemed not so much stuck, but very interested in exploring sort of the medieval kind of era of technology and urban development. And so Viraconium sort of had more elements of like cafe culture of Vienna and all sorts of other things. It also had marauding street gang duelers, which obviously I picked up and ran with. They
were so much fun.
They were so much fun. And the first time I saw them in Viraconium, I'm like, yes, these guys, off we go. His are rather more murderous than mine ended up being, but, different flavors, same great taste. So there was Viraconium, and then when I started writing, I drew pretty heavily on Venice for a whole lot of structure stuff. I decided I didn't want nobility. I didn't want feudalism. And so the Republic of Venice, for most of its history, is a great example of, yes, there are other ways of doing things other than feudalism. So I took that, the ruling merchant class, the nominally egalitarian city that, of course, isn't actually egalitarian because there's also always going to be the people who have and the people who don't.
There's a tremendous amount of class conflict.
Yes. So some of that sort of stuff, a whole lot of sort of Byzantine, Constantinople, because for such a long period in European history, that was the city. It was the center of so much, and it was so big and so powerful. And then I also drew quite a bit on sort of the Caucasus region, so Armenia and Azerbaijan and Georgia, a lot of traditions and cultures and things from there. So I kind of put all of this in the pot and stirred it all up and, sort of pulled bits out. And in the first iteration, I didn't care so much about consistency or anything like that because it was just a fanfic. I'm just doing what I like. So when I came to turn it into a novel, that was when I had to actually sit down and go, okay, well, I can't have this and this. Like they just don't go together. So I'm going to have to figure something out there.
Time for world building spreadsheets.
It was a bit of spreadsheets, a bit of making myself a little wiki so that I could see where things didn't link up. And then there was the things that I just randomly decided to do because it seemed cool, like dropping half of the city into the ocean. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. We'll have a great big cliff in the middle. And it's like, now all of a sudden I have to figure out how this actually works and functions. So that was challenging, but we got there.
So I know we got one or two questions in the chat. Is there any more questions in the chat before I ask my last two questions? I'll just throw it out there for 1 second, see if we get anything. Well, looks like we're doing pretty good. You can feel free to throw those in while I'm asking the last couple of questions, guys. All right. So last two questions. What do you hope that readers take away from your book? What is the number one and number two things?
I had fun. That's my big thing. I want people to have fun. I want this roller coaster to be worth it. I hope they come away wanting to read the next book because I'm on the hook for 2 more. So it'd be nice if other people showed up for those ones as well.
Definitely worked for me. I'm ready for the next one already. Hurry up.
I'm working on it. Yeah, and as I said earlier, sort of that the just a little bit of questioning of assumptions and of especially the assumption that the system as it currently stands is the way that it needs to be. Just, a little bit of gentle questioning.
Alenko says, in terms of writing speed, bring your inner Sanderson forward.
I don't know how he does it. Like,
Batman
I can't.
just like he goes to the bathroom and just shits them out like crazy. It's ridiculous. Yeah. You're all about, the pipe smoking woman. I have toilets in everything I write for some reason.
Oh, they're very important.
All right. So this is super exciting. What is next for you? You've got these 2 books. Do you have a timeline for them? When can we expect the next thing? Is that too early to ask? Do you have any other projects that you want to talk about that you're excited about talking about before we move on? So,
yeah, 2 more books that I'm on the hook for. We're hoping that it's going to be 1 a year. So hopefully book 2 will be around the same time next year. But like that certainly depends on how everything goes between now and then. But yes, hoping for it to be fairly quick. And beyond that, I haven't really let myself think too much about what I do next. I really want to do well enough with these books that I am invited to write more by Orbit. I am very excited to be with Orbit, and they are a great publisher, and I would like for them to want more books from me. And there's a whole lot of ideas that are sort of swirling around at the moment. I find it a big mental shift. Sort of when you're setting out and when you're querying, you're told that you want a standalone book with series potential. So you want it to be quite self-contained. So that's the sort of idea that I've been thinking about, is something that goes nicely here but can branch out. But almost the first thing my Orbit editor said to me is, we want series. We like series. And so all of a sudden my brain has permission to think about bigger ideas that can be, that are a series from the very get-go. And I'm finding that that's fun, that's interesting. There's a whole lot happening in my brain that is sort of hitherto been blocked off, but now it's allowed, and I can think more broadly. So I'm enjoying the ideas simmering.
So now you have permission to be Robert Jordan and write a trilogy that's like 14 books.
I'm not sure that they'd support me for 14 books, but let's see how Notorious Sorcerer does. There's also always the possibility that if the series does really well, they will invite me to write more in this universe. And at that point, I don't want to be too attached to anything else. But there's a whole lot more to explore in this world. So, yeah, there's going to be more. I'm just not sure.
Awesome.
What sort of more there's going to be.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for giving us a chance to talk to you for a little bit, Dee.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Notorious Sorcerer just hit bookshelves, bookstores, shelves, bookshelves, bookstores. Hit bookstores. That also hit online bookstores, in-person bookstores, independent bookstores, whatever your favorite bookstore is. It hit it on the 13th of September in the United States. It just came out. And the 15th in the UK. It is so good. So good. I can't even express how super happy I was with it, and how much I enjoyed it, and how much I just tore through it and had a wonderful time with it. So I'm going to put the link in stream one more time. And please, everybody, go check it out.